we've been attacked. And a ceasefire would just be an aspirin, a Band-Aid solution. It might give, I can see why people would be attracted to the idea. But basically, it takes us back to the status quo of October 7th at 6 in the morning, where Israel continues to live next to this terrorist regime, which is capable of the most brutal atrocities. And we'll just wait for the next Hamas massacre. Is that what
about
people
a
are
pause?
suggesting?
Let's speak to Mark Regev, who's spokesman for Benjamin Netanyahu. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
That's the question then that Catherine Filt was just saying there. There is suggestions that there have been assaults around the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City. Is Israel willing to target a hospital area because it believes Hamas is sheltering beneath it?
So we will always make a maximum effort to distinguish between Hamas, who is our enemy, and we're going to hit them hard, and between Gaza's civilians. And of course, the challenge we face is that Hamas has a documented historical record of shooting out of schools, out of UN facilities, and even now using hospitals. And so our challenge is to hit our enemy and to do so with as limited collateral damage as is possible. That's our goal.
But what does that mean in practice? Because if they are, as you say they are, in the area, are you still willing to bomb a hospital?
Well, we haven't bombed hospitals, but no Hamas people can have immunity. And at Shifa Hospital, which is the largest hospital in Gaza City, there is underneath the hospital a whole network of Hamas command and controls. And we know for a fact that on the day of their attack, on October 7th, when they massacred our people, and they were expecting an Israeli response, we actually saw scores of Hamas terrorists run to the hospital because they've got underground bunkers there. One of the hostages who was released, the 4 out of the 239 who are still being held captive in Gaza, she reported that she was taken to underground tunnels. She talked about a spider web of underground tunnels. And it's clear that if Hamas has no compulsion whatsoever, no qualms whatsoever about murdering innocent civilians, about raping, about burning babies alive, and so I don't think one should be surprised that they're willing to use Gaza civilians and even an important hospital in Gaza as their command and control under the ground.
But what I understand exactly the point you're making, but the point still remains there. What do you do about it then? You're saying you're not bombing a hospital in the sense you're not deliberately bombing a hospital for the sake of bombing a hospital, but are you willing to accept some collateral damage of people in a hospital in order to get at the people beneath the hospital? Is that collateral damage you're willing to tolerate?
So we will always make a maximum effort to differentiate between the innocent civilian population and between the Hamas terrorists.
I understand you make a maximum effort, but does that effort fall short we know it falls short of you not tackling Hamas in that area, so it must mean you are willing to accept a certain amount of casualties.
So I think in any combat situation, when Britain was part of the coalition that defeated ISIS and forced it out of Mosul, that there was a certain amount of collateral damage, but you try to minimize that as best you can.
But how do you do that in a hospital? Because people can't leave hospitals very often, can they? That's the criticism that's often leveled.
First of all, we're urging everyone who can to leave. But you're asking me to tell you about possible Israeli operations in the future, how we would do it. Yes, and I don't want to go into that. All I can tell you is that Hamas should be blamed here, because they're actually committing, if you think about it, they're committing a double war crime. War crime number one is, of course, they target and brutally massacre Israeli civilians, which is, of course, a war crime in international law. But the fact that they have deliberately put their military infrastructure, their terrorist machine, in schools, in hospitals, even in UN facilities in the past, that shows that they have no compulsion whatsoever about using Gaza's civilians as a shield for their machine. That is also a war crime. In normal countries like the UK, Israel, France, we have militaries to protect our people. In Gaza, Hamas inverts that. They have people, their civilians, protect their military machine. It really is disgusting.
There's lots of calls, though, Mark, you'll understand this, for a humanitarian pause, going so far as a ceasefire. But even if we get to a pause, which is not a ceasefire, it's not a negotiated settlement, is there anything that will make Israel stop its program of bombing short of the elimination of Hamas? Is there anything that would lead to a pause in Israel's mind?
It's clear that Hamas wants a ceasefire because we're hitting them hard. And what would they like? They'd like, we hit Israel, we murder 1,400 Israelis, and then we take another, at this stage, 239 hostage inside the Gaza Strip, and they're held in some dungeon. And then, of course, the UN calls for a ceasefire when Israel starts to fight back. We are the victims of aggression. I would ask you, if I may, after Boko Haram kidnapped the hundreds of young schoolgirls, anyone called for a ceasefire against Boko Haram after 9/11, when the Americans were brutally attacked by Al-Qaeda? Did people call for a ceasefire? We've been attacked. And a ceasefire would just be an aspirin, a Band-Aid solution. It might give, I can see why people would be attracted to the idea. But basically, it takes us back to the status quo of October 7th at 6 in the morning, where Israel continues to live next to this terrorist regime, which is capable of the most brutal atrocities, and we'll just wait for the next Hamas massacre. Is that what
about
people are suggesting?
What about a pause? What about a pause to allow more humanitarian aid in? Because you said you're not fighting Palestinians, civilians, you're fighting Hamas. You must concede that although you might be trying to limit the damage, an awful lot of damage is being done. 8,000 people dead. 8,000 people dead. And at some point, people are going to count the cost of you defending yourself. They accept your right to defend yourself, but they'll count the cost and say, this is too high. People are going to get up this morning and they're going to die this afternoon who have no quarrel with Israel, who've committed no sin, no fault whatsoever. They're going to die today. And ultimately, Israel, while legitimately defending itself, has to bear in mind the cost of doing so. Is there ever going to be a pause, in your view, short of Hamas being eliminated?
So the first thing I have to say, you ask a long question, and I'll deal with all parts of it. I won't run away from anything. But you said 8,000 people have been killed. All right. So first of all those numbers come out of the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. You have no idea how many of them are terrorists and how many of them are indeed civilians. If you believe Hamas propaganda, they're all civilians. They're all children. Yes, it's clearly not the case.
Well, how many do you think? How many do you think are civilians?
I just want to give you one example. Remember the story from a few days ago about the hospital that Israel supposedly hit, and afterward it was proven it wasn't us. At the time, Hamas said between 500 and 800 civilians were killed. That's what they said on record. You could look at the news stories that came out immediately following, the allegations that Israel attacked the hospital. But we know today, AFP. Right? A news agency reported based on European intelligence services that maybe 50 people were killed in that incident, of course, by Islamic Jihad. It was their rocket that malfunctioned. It wasn't Israel. But that's 10% of the figures that Hamas was putting out, 10%. Surely we should all be skeptical of these numbers. They're coming out of Gaza.
Do you have numbers?
Having said that,
do you have numbers? Mark,
no.
Do you have numbers? Because you've got the amazing intelligence. You've got the best intelligence you would imagine in the entire area. You must have a number. You must know the numbers of dead that you can make an estimate of.
I'm afraid the assumption you're making is that we're better than the British or the American or the Canadian armies. When there's a combat situation going on, I can't tell you exactly how many people have been killed. I hope we've managed to kill many Hamas terrorists. They deserve it. They deserve to meet that end. But we don't want to hurt innocent civilians. And now I'm going to the second part of your question, with your permission.
Go on.
Our goal is to hit Hamas and hit Hamas hard, and at the same time, make a maximum effort to avoid civilian casualties. That's precisely why we've asked the civilian population to relocate. We've urged them to move out of combat zones. We've asked them to move to the south because we know there's going to be heavy fighting in the north. And actually, hundreds of thousands of Gazans have moved to the south. They've heeded our advice. This, while, as you know, Hamas has told people don't move, become martyrs for our crazy cause, for our extremist theology. More than that, they've actually put up armed roadblocks to prevent people from leaving. When they say people can't leave a hospital, okay, it's possible there are some who can't. But it's possible also that the Hamas leadership of the health hospital is not allowing people to leave. They want them there as human shields. And it's just that Israel has talked about human shields in Gaza. I believe your own prime minister has in Britain, the American president has as well. Hamas is deliberately brutalizing the people of Gaza for its war machine. We wouldn't have any of these casualties whatsoever if Hamas hadn't started this round of fighting, that they attacked us brutally on October 7th. What, does anyone expect Israel not to respond to this attack upon our people?
Do you think Israel do you think when people talk about Israel and their policies, other politics comes in to bear? Do you think that there's a tradition of anti-Semitism in the left, for example? Do you think that politics comes to bear when people make criticisms of Israel?
So when I see people demonstrating against Israel, the first thing I ask, I presume some of them are Hamas supporters, and some of them are no doubt Hamas apologists. And with them, I understand them. I know where they're coming from. If there are good people who just want to see peace, I would ask you the following: right? Is there another way to dismantle Hamas? Is there another way to prevent another massacre like Israel went through on October 7th? Because if you have another way, I'm very happy to hear it. But Hamas isn't going to voluntarily disband. And unfortunately, Hamas has shown itself that it's not changing its very, very ruthless, extreme ideology. They're ISIS on steroids. We saw what they did. And every day new reports are coming about the brutalities, the massive raping of women, the massacre of young people at that music festival, putting people in pits and just shooting them. We know who Hamas is. They burned families alive. They shot children in front of their parents. And in other cases, they shot parents in front of their children. We know who we're dealing with: a horrific, barbaric, fanatical enemy. Now, if someone wants to tell me, oh, there's another way to deal with them, I'm happy to hear. I haven't heard it yet.
Mark Regev, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, sir.
That is Mark Regev, their spokesman for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu.